Well, thank you, Greg. It's a very rich privilege for me to be here this morning. I want to begin by saying that the fundamental reason I'm a Christian is because it is true. Now, for some of us here in this room, that's not a provocative or controversial claim, but actually for many, it's edgy, it is controversial. Why? Why is it controversial? Well, there are many reasons. Let me give you a few. First is this: we live in a skeptical age. We're a skeptical bunch of people, perhaps cynical. And this point was brought home to me recently in an article I came across, found in The Economist. The subtitle of the article reads, "In-flight announcements are not entirely truthful. What might an honest one sound like?" Let me read this to you. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are delighted to welcome you aboard Veritas Airways, the airline that tells it like it is. Please ensure that your seatbelt is fastened, your seat back is upright, and your tray table is stowed. At Veritas Airways, your safety is our first priority." Actually, that's not quite true. If it were, our seats would be rear-facing, like those in military aircraft, since they are safer in the event of an emergency landing. But then hardly anybody would buy our tickets, and we would go bust. The flight attendants are now pointing out the emergency exits. This is the part of the announcement that you might want to pay attention to. Knowing where the exits are makes a dramatic difference to your chances of survival if we have to evacuate the aircraft. Also, please keep your seatbelt fastened when seated. This is to protect you from the risk of clear air turbulence, a rare but extremely nasty form of disturbance that can cause a severe injury. Imagine the heavy food trolleys jumping into the air and bashing into the overhead lockers, and you will have some idea of how nasty it can be. Your life jacket can be found under your seat. In the event of a landing on water, an unprecedented miracle will have occurred, because in the history of aviation, the number of wide-body aircraft that have made successful landings on water is 0. This aircraft is equipped with inflatable slides. Please remove high-heeled shoes before using the slides. We might as well add that space helmets and anti-gravity belts should also be removed, since even to mention the use of the slides as rafts is to enter the realm of science fiction. Please switch off all mobile phones, since they can interfere with the navigation systems. Well, at least that's what you've always been told. The real reason to switch them off is because they interfere with mobile networks on the ground. But somehow that doesn't sound quite so good. On Channel 11, you will find a video with a voiceover explaining some exercises you can do to reduce the risk of deep vein thrombosis. We are aware that this video is tedious, but it is not meant to be fun. It is meant to limit our liability in the event of lawsuits. Once we have reached cruising altitude, you will be offered a light meal. The purpose of these refreshments is partly to keep you in your seats where you cannot do yourselves or anyone else any harm. Please consume alcohol in moderate quantities so that you become mildly sedated. That said, we can always turn the cabin air quality down a notch or two to help ensure that you are sufficiently drowsy. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. Cabin crew, please make sure we have remembered to close the doors. Doors to automatic and cross-check. Thank you for flying Veritas. We live in a skeptical age, and often this is because truth claims are made, and behind those truth claims are ideas that are not necessarily true. So that's the first obstacle. The second obstacle is this: the culture in which we live is one that judges truth claims not necessarily on intellectual rigor, but actually on attitudes or feelings. Attitudes are often the main driving force behind the intellectual discourse on truth. David Bentley Hart has said it well, and speaking of the New Atheist, he said that what we are seeing now are attitudes masquerading as ideas, emotional commitments disguised as intellectual honesty. Attitudes driving the discourse on truth. A friend of mine recently, who's deeply influential in the Canadian media, I was speaking to him about God and faith and some pretty heady topics, and he was explaining to me why he did not believe in God. And he said, "Look, Nathan, the reason why I do not believe in God is because it's not real. It's fake." And he said, "Look, I'm an analytical kind of guy. But you need to have faith to believe in all this stuff." He said, "Also, you can't prove that stuff. You can't prove Jesus was an actual historical person. You can't prove any of that stuff." And I was a bit surprised by this. So we spent about 10, 15 minutes going through actually the historicity of Christ, of the resurrection. After which, I said to him, "Look, I think I know why you don't believe in God. But let me ask you this. What would it take for you to believe in God?" And he looked at me and he said, "In order for me to believe in God, I'd have to change the way I live. The partying, the language I use, the women I hang around with. And Nathan, I do not want to do that. Now, for my friend, attitude and lifestyle trumped truth. Now, many people have shared this sentiment, but that's just one example. Attitude and often feeling often drives and trumps truth. So skepticism, then attitudes driving the discourse on truth. And then the third one, what I want to mention to you, is something like this. The Christian doctrine, if you think about it, is very strange. The Christian story is a strange story. Have you ever thought about that? Now imagine with me, if you will, speaking to a friend of yours who has no knowledge of the Christian God, no knowledge of Jesus Christ, our Lord. And you start talking to him about how Jesus, God in flesh, first century Palestine, and he lived, he died, he rose again. And then to top it all off, you tell your friend that you prayed to Jesus Christ this morning. Now, what do you think your friend is thinking at that point? Okay? They're thinking you've gone crazy. Okay, that's what they're thinking. And maybe an apt response might be, okay, hold on, you prayed to Jesus Christ this morning. Okay, well, then maybe tomorrow morning, let's talk again. I'm gonna try talking to Julius Caesar. That sort of makes sense, does it not? Now, this sentiment that your friend might share about you praying to Jesus Christ in the morning is the same sentiment that people share toward the idea, the things that we're going to be talking about and listening to today, things about the reliability of Scripture, the historicity of the resurrection. Those big intrinsic things to the Christian worldview have been relegated to the imaginary world. But for many of us here, if not all of us here, we do not believe those things are imaginary. We believe those things are true. Why? Well, when we ask that question, we need to ask two other questions. And we need to start with asking, what is truth? What is truth, and how do we know it? Now, I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour because we don't have a lot of time here. So I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour through these two questions. First, what is truth? Truth is that which corresponds to reality. What is truth? Truth is that which corresponds to reality. How do we know it? Well, there are three tests that logicians often apply to ascertain what is true. First test is something called the Coherence Test. Coherence Test. In order for something to be true, those ideas, those beliefs need to cohere. In other words, the ideas and beliefs that go into your worldview, they must fit together. They must confirm each other. And if they don't, then you have something, have a worldview that is incoherent. Therefore, it's not true. Now, imagine with me, if you will, this evening, Greg, Manette, and I, we go for a cup of coffee. And we actually think, hey, look, I like to get a new iPhone. I want to get the newest iPhone. And Greg just says to me, I don't have an iPhone, but if you can afford one, Nathan, then you get one. So we go to the Apple Store, I get an iPhone. Then we go for a cup of coffee. And being very Canadian, we go to Tim Hortons. And we sit down and we munch on muffins and Timbits and everything else. And there comes a point in the conversation in which I say to Greg, look, I don't know about this truth thing. It's just not doing it for me. I think, the whole idea of relativistic truth, I find that appealing. It's a very delicious idea. I just don't think there's any such thing as right or wrong. And so we start talking about it, and Greg is very sympathetic, and he's like, yes, tell me more, Nathan. Tell me more about this. So we talk, and I just talk about, hey, look, I don't really think they're objective values. They're individualistic, and going on about that. At the end of our conversation, remember, Greg doesn't have a cell phone, okay? He doesn't have an iPhone. He reaches across the table, grabs my iPhone, puts it in his pocket. I looked to him, I said, Greg, look, that's my phone. Can I have it back? And he said, no, I'm just heading home now. And I said, yeah, but you have my phone. Yes. Yeah, but I want this phone. I need a phone. I looked to him and I say, what am I going to say? No, that's mine. That is wrong. You're stealing from me. Now, at that point, he's going to say, hold on, but you just moments ago, you just said there's no such thing as right or wrong. You don't believe in, that kind of thing. But here you're saying that I'm wrong. So all of a sudden, what are we seeing? Well, there's incoherence there. The beliefs and ideas that go into my actions and what I say, how I live, they're contradicting each other, therefore incoherent. So that's one test, coherence test. Then we come to the correspondence test. In other words, in order for something to be true, those ideas, those beliefs that you have, they must correspond to facts or evidence. Let me put it to you like this. If I were to say to you the Maple Leafs, the Toronto Maple Leafs, won the Stanley Cup in 2013. Now, I know we're talking about truth, so the Toronto Maple Leafs, I'm not sure if they factor into this conversation, but just bear with me. Is that statement true or not? Well, unfortunately, it's not true. Why is that statement not true? It's not true because that is not grounded in reality, in facts and evidence. And here's the thing. Even for us Maple Leafs fans, even if we want it to be true, it still isn't true. Does that make sense? Now, those attitudes, those feelings that we have towards the Maple Leafs, like that they won the Stanley Cup, doesn't matter. That is not grounded in reality. Therefore, it's not true. Why? Because it does not correspond to reality. Coherence, correspondence, and the third test is something called pragmatic value. Pragmatic value simply asks the question, look, what practical difference do my beliefs make? Where's the practical relevance? One person put it like this: the Christian worldview is like it's like a torch that sheds light on all issues of life. It helps us make sense of things. The amazing thing about the Christian worldview is that it has immense practical relevance. Now, so in short, when we look at truth and we look at the Christian worldview, this should excite us. It ticks all those boxes: coherence, correspondence, and pragmatic value. But it's more than that. Much more than that. The profundity of the Christian faith is that truth is not simply found in ideas. It's found in a person, the person of Christ. The facts of the Christian worldview, they all point to a God who has made himself known to us in the person of Christ. And so the invitation that Christ offered to his disciples, his closest followers, and others is the same invitation he extends to us today, to acknowledge him as the truth. But it doesn't stop there. He asks us to place our trust in him. Now, for many of us, this might not seem as a staggering idea. And actually, if we were to be honest, sometimes it's very convenient to place our trust in God. But what happens when it's inconvenient or costly? You ever thought about that? I'm sure you have. What happens when we go through times of disappointment? Maybe unanswered prayer. We feel like God is not answering our prayer. Times of loss, grief. Have you ever been there before? I have. What do we do with that? In John 14, Jesus said to his disciples, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." Now, the remarkable thing about the context into which Jesus said that statement is this: they were a deeply troubled group. Moments before he says this, he announces them that there is a traitor in their midst. Then Judas goes out into the night. Then Jesus looks over to Peter and says, "Peter, you will deny me. You are going to deny me 3 times. So just think about this. The people to whom Jesus says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled," they are a deeply troubled group. Why? Because all the things that they've based their life on are crumbling. They're uncertain of even who Jesus is. They're losing hope. And we find, again, when we read the whole story, Luke 24 and the road to Emmaus, that story at the end, hope is restored. They realize that, yes, he is it. You've got to come and see him, the risen Lord. Probably one of the most important questions we can ask ourselves today is, do we know him? Do we know this God? Do you know him? You know him personally? My hope and prayer this morning is that, as John wrote in his gospel, in the 20th chapter, that you may believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. And in believing, you may have life in his name. Thank you for listening.